Hi everybody, I'm Martin Kramer. In today's video we're talking about creativity. Let's demystify creativity. We all know how important creativity is in today's life and especially in business life. And to become more creative, a different way of thinking can help us. And this different way of thinking is lateral thinking. Okay, then more specifically, what is this video about? To answer that, to give you a better idea what to expect, let me introduce you to Vicky. That's Vicky, a figure from a TV series I used to watch when I was a kid. Now Vicky is a Viking and he lives with this tribe of Vikings, and as they go along their business they usually get into serious trouble. When that happens, when they try to find a way out of their misery, Vicky starts to rub his nose and then the stars appear and he gets this great idea. Great trick, right? You rub your nose like this, snap, and bam, there's this brilliant idea. I wish I could do that. And this is what this video is about. Creativity. How to take creativity from a mysterious magic to a predictable process. Lateral thinking can be a way for making this process more predictable. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't need lateral thinking to be creative, but lateral thinking can give you a better understanding of creativity. We will also talk about brainstorming and how to do it right. I will give you some very concrete tips and tricks how to get more and better ideas out of your brainstorming sessions. So where does lateral thinking come from? What are the origins? This is a picture of Edward de Bono. According to Wikipedia, he first used the term lateral thinking in 1967. Some 20 years ago, I stumbled across Edward de Bono's book called Lateral Thinking. For me, that was eye-opening. I believe I lost the original one, but went to buy this replacement here. Edward de Bono's Neue Denkschule, that's what it's called. Kreativer Denken, it's in German. So without further ado, let's find out what lateral thinking is all about. But hold on, before we actually dig into the details, let's understand our current way of thinking. Let's first talk about vertical thinking. Vertical thinking, also known as critical thinking. Vertical thinking is our traditional thinking. Vertical thinking is left brain thinking. Usually, cognitive tasks like math, logic, business cases, analyses, reasoning, these are associated with left brain activity. On the other side, we have activities like music, art, creativity, imagination or intuition. These are right brain activities. Now, these left brain activities like math, logic are cognitive tasks of vertical thinking. And we are really great vertical thinkers. We've been trained and socialized in schools of vertical thinking. In childhood, in school, in university. I studied math and computer science in university, and it was there when I was really trained in this rigid, scientific, logical way of thinking. Yeah, you don't have to go to university to get socialized in vertical thinking. Let's try to grasp the idea of vertical thinking a bit better. Let's say we have a problem we're thinking about. This is our starting point. From this starting point, there are several paths to solve the problem, several ways of thinking to follow until we have solved the problem. This is when we finally pass the finish line. Vertical thinking is selective. That means we use vertical thinking to cut off alternatives which do not seem promising. Vertical thinking therefore helps us to eliminate all the possible routes to address the problem. And there can be many potential routes. With that, good vertical thinkers can very quickly produce the route to the solution. You probably already work with very smart, very intelligent people, and you might have heard them saying, this is not working because these people are great in cutting off alternatives. And sometimes they actually let us know about their ability. Yet this effectively helps them to quickly arrive at solutions. As we will find out, as a downside, vertical thinking or critical thinking can also hinder us to be creative. To understand this other way of thinking, lateral thinking, let's first try to understand our brain a bit better. For that, Edward de Bono offers two helpful models. By the way, I've slightly changed these models to make them more understandable in today's world or visually interesting. The first model is called ink on a towel. The second model is called water on sand. The first model. What happens when ink drops onto a towel? For that, I've taken out my fountain pen and started dropping ink on a towel. This is a kitchen towel, put that on the kitchen table, and then I started to squeeze ink from my fountain pen and plush. Here's the first drop. Here are a few more, and I continue to do that, and you see there's more and more drops of ink now sitting on this paper towel. I guess you get the point what is happening. Let's move on to the second model. The second model is called water on sand. So what happens when water drips onto a sand surface? For this, I went into the garden, poured some water into this watering can. Here's the sand pit, and then I'm starting to splash some water on the sand. This is the first one. Here another drop, and some more. You see that? And really big hit of water coming on. And a little fast forward. With a bit more time and maybe a bit more of imagination, we get this here. If you continue to drip water on a sand surface, we might get this landscape, this mountain or canyon landscape. Now at this point, you might ask, why is he telling us that? So bear with me for a moment. Let's compare these two models. First, model A, ink on a towel, and model B, water on sand. Let's compare them in the criteria: memory, order or timing, and information processing. Let's start with memory. Which scenario is better suited to serve as a model for memorizing? For memorizing information coming in. Think of the drops of liquid, maybe water or ink, as information coming in. Well, model A, ink on a towel, is much better when it comes to preserving information. That is, the ink is clearly visible in the exact position where it dropped onto the towel. It is not moving anywhere, it just stays right there. This is quite different for the water on the sand surface. Since the water is moving along the structures of the sand surface, the information, think of water as information, the information and the structure, the surface, is altered. When we come to the order or timing of liquid coming in, does it matter in which order the drops come in? For model A, it does not matter. But for model B, the order clearly matters, because the water drops on a surface that already contains these little hills and valleys. And now the water is flowing along these little canyons. And as the water is flowing, it actually makes the canyons deeper. And that brings us to the third criteria, information processing. Here clearly model B excels. Again, let's imagine that the liquid that is dropping onto the sand surface would be information that is flowing into the system. Then in model B, the information is changing the system. It is changing the structure of the surface. And there's also something happening with the information. It is flowing along the structures that has been built by previous information. Okay, from now on we will use this canyon metaphor as a model to describe self-organizing pattern processing systems. Self-organizing, as the system is organizing itself with the information that is coming in. Pattern processing, as the system is producing patterns from the incoming information. Patterns, and not just some chaos without any structure. You can actually see the patterns in this picture. Patterns of hills and valleys. And when new information is coming in, the system is processing this information by using its available patterns. Thus, pattern processing. And you probably guessed it already. Our brain is such a self-organizing pattern processing system. So in this picture, this metaphor of a canyon can help us to understand some of the attributes of our brain and thus our thinking. So in the following, I will switch freely between a sand surface and our brain, between drops of water and information, between flow of water and flow of information or flow of thoughts. Okay, you might say a canyon surface. Come on, this is not a good metaphor of something so complex as our brain. But it's a model. It's just a model. And this is what it is, a model, a simplification of our reality. A model helps us to reduce the complexity of our reality and therefore deliberately leaves out complexity and information that is not helpful in a specific context. And this model of the canyon surface can be very helpful to understand creativity. As I promise you, we will see in a minute. Self-organizing pattern processing systems have certain characteristics. And with that come some advantages, but also disadvantages. Let's examine these pros and cons in detail. First of all, our brain and how it works has been emerged through evolution. Lots of tweaking and changing and optimizing over millions of years. And undoubtedly, we as Homo sapiens have been quite successful with that. If that was really good for our planet is a different topic, and let's leave that aside for now. Then these pattern processing systems have great advantages when it comes to selecting alternatives. Let's call that instant selection of alternatives. That means when information enters the system, its path is already defined. In order to illustrate this, I've chosen this picture of the Austrian Alps. Let's say a drop of rain falls. Let's say it falls from the sky and it hits the surface. That is the mountain right there. And it flows down this mountain in a predefined way. So here it flows down this mountain and that flows into a river which flows away to the left side and maybe to Innsbruck later on. Then another drop of water falls from the sky. This time it hits the surface on another mountain and immediately starts flowing down this mountain, eventually flowing into another direction, here to the right. And this happens at the very moment the drop of water hits the surface. In other words, the very moment the information enters the system. In yet some other words, when our brain picks up new information, we very quickly know what to do with it. This, obviously, has been a clear advantage in the evolution of our brain. Here's another advantage. Patterns can be extended. Let's say I'm on point A, and I know my way to point B. And at point B, I also know my way to point C. Then quite obviously, I also know the way from point A to point C. You can use this feature geographically or logically. For example, I live in Berlin. I know my way from home to work. And from there, I might know how to get to the Brandenburg Gate. Then I can combine these two patterns to know my way from home to the Brandenburg Gate. Okay, understood. Pattern processing systems have great advantages. But they also come with some severe disadvantages. Let's talk about these now. Back to Austria again. Here's the raindrop falling onto the surface. We know where it's going. Would it be possible for the drop of water to move over to the right and then start to climb the other mountain and then cross over that ridge? No, obviously not. This is just not possible. Thus, there is no choice. That is, when information comes in, we don't have a choice. The alternative is immediately selected. Our response is immediately triggered. Here's another scenario. A different kind of surface. This time, it's the Scottish Highlands. A drop of water falls. Believe me, it happens quite often there. And another one falls. And yet another one. And as happens quite often, there's another one and just doesn't stop. What happens here is something we call a complete dominance. That means we have a structure that completely dominates. Here is the valley that leads all water to follow this little creek. In the domain of our brain, it would be a situation in which we have learned only one response to whatever information is coming in. You can sometimes see this in the very predictable answers that some politicians will give to whatever situation is at hand. Have a look at this beautiful waterfall in Iceland. It's a nice metaphor for patterns that become stronger and stronger over time. Just as flowing water can build these deep canyons over millions of years, our ways of thinking can become more rigid and rigid over time. So years and years of thinking the same way can get us trapped in the same old thoughts. As you can see that with older folks. As patterns can also be extended, sometimes a small trigger can lead older people to go through quite a lengthy, very well memorized flow of thoughts. Here's another disadvantage. There are no in-betweens. In other words, large-scale changes are easier than small-scale changes. Here's the river in Iceland again. This here depicts our current way of thinking, our current patterns. If you try to make smaller changes, that is, deviate from the current flow, there's a strong tendency to fall back. Actually, it's much easier to learn totally new patterns. As you can see in eating habits, for example. Let me tell you my own personal story for that. Over the years, I gained a bit of weight, kilogram per year, maybe. As many of you, I always wanted to lose some of these kilograms, but as you know, these New Year resolutions, they just don't work. After a few days, you fall back to your current way of living. At one point in time, a doctor told me I really had to change, right? See, high blood pressure runs in my family, and this then led me to quite radically change my habits. I started running, gave myself some new rules for eating, and implemented a whole bunch of other measures. But then, losing weight and sticking to it was not a big problem anymore. It was not a big problem after all. 1.5 years later, I ran my first marathon, something I never thought would be possible for me. For me, it was like this trigger lifted me out of this canyon right onto this plateau right there, where I would then learn new habits. To be clear, to be frank though, the old habits, they're still there. And when you get too close to them, you easily get sucked into the old way of doing things again. But you also have a new way of doing things available for you. We already have seen that extensions are an advantage of self-organizing pattern processing system. It also comes with a disadvantage though. See, when you can extend patterns so easily, you might miss out shortcuts. In this example, we know our way from A to B and from B to C, and thus we know our way from A to C. Cool. But sometimes there are better ways to get from A to C. Right? See this shortcut. I could make up some examples again, geographically or logically, but I guess you get the point. You've probably seen this picture. If you only have a hammer, every screw looks like a nail. That means we are bound to the tools and concepts and thoughts or ideas we have available. And new problems and challenges then get the treatment with the tools we have. This picture nicely shows what happens to a problem, here the screw, when it is addressed with the wrong approaches, here the hammer. Another disadvantage is therefore the availability of non-adequate patterns. Yet another disadvantage is arrows through similar starting positions. Again, we have a surface. Here it's the mountain ridge and some water is coming in, moving over into the field of thoughts and ideas. Let's imagine the valley on the left contains thoughts that eventually lead to great ideas. Now here's a very similar information coming in. This time the thoughts lead us into a very different area, the valley to the right, which might contain bad ideas. We can see that from very similar starting conditions, very different thoughts might be triggered. This has to do with the instant selection we already talked about. This is also just the opposite scenario to the very broad valley in the Scottish Highlands we've discussed a minute ago. Thus, often we are prisoners of our successful thinking habits. And for something truly new, we need to escape. And this is what lateral thinking is all about. How do we break out of our current thinking patterns? Now that we have an understanding of the sand surface model and its advantages and also disadvantages, we can now continue to deal with the disadvantages. And for that, we can stay within this picture. So in the following, I will show you some approaches on how to break free and get out of your prisons of thoughts. Provocative ideas can create a momentum. Here, we have the structured surface again. And here's our current way of thinking. In order to break out of this well-established flow of thoughts, a provocative idea can help. You could think of this provocative idea like a sledgehammer that kicks you out of these thinking habits. Bam! And off you go into a new direction. In the following, I would like to tell you two stories about a true creative genius, Miles Davis. So, Miles is playing with John Coltrane. Here's a picture of Miles on the left and John Coltrane on the right. Now the solos of John Coltrane keep getting longer and longer, and Miles is challenging Train on that. The story goes that Train replies, "I don't know how to stop," which then brings Miles to return, "Try taking the fucking horn out of your mouth." Well, that's clearly provocative and also triggers you to think into a different direction. I can tell I'm a jazz musician myself, and this provocative idea would lead me to think differently about my soloing. Not sure what Train made out of this, but maybe he started taking a deep breath from time to time. Sometimes we need to pass through wrong territory. Here's our current way of thinking again, and it works, right? The thinking habits have been proven successful in the past, and there are territories which contain, let me call them wrong ideas. These ideas which simply don't do the job. Ideas that don't solve the problems at hand. Yet, as successful as our current thinking has been in the past, we might need some new ideas. To visualize this, I've located these great ideas near the lake on the top right there. Look. So here comes the provocative idea, and it kicks us out of our current way of thinking. And the interesting thing is that in order to reach this lake of great ideas, we need to pass through the territory of wrong ideas. If we can remain, let's say, confident after the provocative idea set us off into a new territory, so if we can remain confident for some time and move through this territory of wrong ideas, then we have the chance to get back into a territory of working ideas. Edward de Bono calls these moves lateral jumps. Here's what Herbie Hancock, another great jazz musician, tells about Miles Davis. It's Stuttgart, 1963. Wayne Shorter, Ron Carter, Tony Williams, and Herbie Hancock are on stage and play a tune called So What. Music is hot, they play on the edge. Miles is doing one of his great solos, and then Herbie Hancock, a jazz musician, plays the wrong chords, and it sounds completely wrong. And Herbie Hancock is shocked. But Miles pauses for a second and then plays notes that make Herbie's chord sound right again. So Miles was able to make something that was clearly wrong into something that was right. Miles did not hear this as a mistake. He heard it as something that happened, an event. So he dealt with it. And since he did not hear it as a mistake, it felt like his responsibility to play something that would fit. For Herbie Hancock, this story told him about something that is not just related to music, but also about life. The important thing is that we grow. We need a mind that is open enough to experience situations as they are and turn them into something constructive. We have learned now a key technique of lateral thinking: delayed evaluation. Sometimes you need to pass through the area of bad ideas to reach great ideas. This is how I would sketch it. You think about a problem and you generate ideas on how to solve it. One idea brings you to the next idea. And if you're able to resist the urge to evaluate each and single idea and thus subsequently cut it off, you can continue through the territory of bad ideas and potentially reach a great idea. And now we can come back to vertical thinking. It actually makes sense to combine lateral thinking and vertical thinking. It's not that one way or the other is better. It's about the combination. It's when you combine these two different modes in the right order, you can become more creative. So you start with lateral thinking. So brainstorming with delayed evaluation, for instance. And only after you have created a set of ideas, you move over into vertical thinking. So you start a brainstorming session to create ideas. And then you use vertical thinking to cut off stupid ideas. And hopefully there are some great ideas that make it through the scrutiny of your vertical thinking. And these are then the ideas that can bring you forward. There are different tools available. Brainstorming is clearly one. We'll cover that in a minute. The word "po" instead of saying no is another technique. I leave that to you to figure it out. The dictionary method is another tool. This I'll cover in a minute. 6 thinking hats is another tool that Edward de Bono created. Look it up, it's easy to find. For me, reading de Bono's book about lateral thinking was eye-opening. For me, it started with the awareness, with the understanding of pattern processing and how we follow our own traditional learned way of thinking. I then started to question my own inner urge to be right, and with that also the associated arrogance, an arrogance towards other points of view. For me, this book helped me to somehow overcome this. Let's move on. Another interesting method is the dictionary lookup. How does it work? Here's the situation. You're trying to solve a problem and you're stuck. So you take out your dictionary, open it up to a random page. Then you point your finger on the page, totally randomly. You move to the next noun, just like that. Here it said cheese. See that? Then you ask yourself, what does cheese have in common with your current problem? You start to think about cheese, about its characteristics. You might think it's soft, it's yellow, maybe it's stinky, it might have holes in it. Then you try to figure out what this means to your problem. Obviously, cheese or any other random word is not the solution to your problem. The reason why this method can work is the momentum it can create for your thinking. It can cause you to think towards new directions. It might kick you out of your traditional thinking. You might have seen story cubes, dices with symbols on them. You can also use them in a quite similar fashion. Let's talk about brainstorming. Often I've seen people just get together and start talking about a problem like they would usually do. Saying stuff like, oh no, this is not working, how about this, how about that? Well, this is not brainstorming. You can get so much more out of it. First of all, brainstorming is a formal method, not just a gathering around the coffee table kicking around ideas. It is also a group activity. You can do it on your own, but then you're limited to your own ways of thinking and don't get the input and the provocative ideas from other participants. It requires a facilitator, It's the task of the facilitator to make sure to delay the evaluation of ideas. It requires a note taker. Brainstorming simply works better with some rules. Duration, 30 to 45 minutes. Shorter is not good. You sometimes need some time to get into the flow. Longer is often no good either. It's quickly draining your energy, and after some time you get the clear feeling that the session is about to run dry. So keep it time boxed before it gets too difficult. It should remain, after all, a fun activity. Participants, 6 to 12. Again, if you have less, you might not get enough different inputs, different points of view. If you have too many, it becomes difficult for the individuals to actually participate in the discussion. Even more important is the staffing mix. You want to have a diverse group of people, so deliberately look for different backgrounds. You also absolutely don't want to have a mix of hierarchy. It's important for people to come up with these crazy, stupid, wild ideas. We've just learned that these stupid ideas can trigger great ideas which otherwise we might not be reachable. But at the same time, it's simply difficult to spell out these stupid ideas if, say, the vice president's in the room. Introduction. It's a good idea to have an introduction done by the facilitator. I would usually start with explaining why it's okay to have crazy ideas and why I would ask people to stop evaluating ideas. Also important is the follow-up with vertical thinking, the delayed evaluation. I would often do that directly after the brainstorming session. As we are quite well trained in vertical thinking, it's usually a quick task to sort out non-working ideas and pick the few ones which are really worth following up with. Here are a few tips for you as the facilitator. People will start evaluating ideas. It always happens. So you nicely but firmly tell them to stop evaluating. There might be a discussion on whether an idea is actually new or not. In that case, you just tell the note taker to just simply write it down. The goal of brainstorming, after all, is to come up with as many ideas as possible. If a single idea is new or not, is simply not relevant, at least in the brainstorming session. The same goes for the discussion if an idea is actually relevant. You simply reply, every idea is relevant. A bit more difficult is the situation in which a session is, I would say, it runs dry. There's simply no exciting ideas. And in that case, you become active. You then throw in some really wild or provocative ideas. The actual idea or thought does not matter at all, actually. It's about creating a momentum. It's about the sledgehammer that kicks you out of a dry session. Another problematic situation is the dominance of the moderator or a team member. For that, some awareness might help. After all, it's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's about new ideas. So leave your ego at the door. So that's it for now. I hope you can take something valuable away from this video. First of all, the awareness of the, let me call it canyon processor. For me, these metaphors, these pictures help me to understand why delayed evaluation and provocative ideas can help to become more creative. Then, some concrete tips and tricks for conducting great brainstorming session. I hope I could help you to moderate better brainstorming sessions and from that take away more and lots of great ideas. So, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. Please provide some feedback. Further readings and links are in the notes below. You might also want to join my channel. For that, click the subscribe button and the bell below. So again, thanks for watching. I'm Martin Kramer. Stay safe. Bye for now.